Greetings wizards, greetings programs. Today we'll be going over Lightning Meteor. This is a Talrasha build, and I very much have been enjoying playing this, and I've been enjoying testing it the last few days. So I guess let's dive right in. Skills. Right up front you'll see, we're using 4 elements: Arcane, Calamity. It's our mobility skill on teleport. We have an Aetherwalker in this build, so it's highly mobile. We have Energy Twister for the pull. We are using Ranslors in this build, specifically just for the pull. We don't do damage with the Ranslors. We are just using it for a pull. It's quite nice. That's really because Meteor is such a small attack. We want to pull the enemies in so that we'll be able to efficiently efficiently slay them. We're using Thunder Crash as our lightning element, and then Chain Reaction simply because it's the most convenient option. It doesn't take up a global cooldown action or anything. You can cast it on, you can leave it on auto cast, and you don't have to think about it. It'll keep up your Tau 6 and Tau 4 bonuses. It's really the best option out there for a smooth build, even though it does come with a 20 arcane power cost every 6 seconds or so. Now, we have 2 passive skills. We're using Arcanaut purely for management of resource. This is a very, as you can imagine, arcane power hungry build. We have, Aetherwalker, 25 arcane power per teleport. You got Energy Twister here, 25 arcane power per cast. And then Meteor, even though it says 40 arcane power, base it's 20 because of the weapon in the cube that reduces the arcane power cost of Meteor by half, or by 50% rather. And then Magic Weapon Conduit, this has a dual role. It gives a little bit of increased additive damage and also 10%, and then it also restores arcane power subject to the proc coefficient of the skill, which for Meteor and Twister are fairly low, but when you're grouping up dense packs, it does return quite a bit of arcane power, so it's very nice in that regard. And we're using Astral Presence again for the arcane power regeneration. Illusionist for mobility in combination with the teleport, just to give that extra run speed. We won't be taking advantage of the first half of this, but the run speed is very important for the build. Audacity, it's going to be pretty much a melee build. You're sucking them right in on top of you, and that's where you'll be dealing your damage, so we will have almost 100% usage of this passive. I say almost because sometimes enemies do flee and you shoot at them to kill them. Anyway, Unstable Anomaly for the second life, very important. Okay, on to the items. As you can see here, we're using Aetherwalker. We have, for the mobility, as I said, as our primary weapon. In the cube, we have the Grand Vizier. This gives us that arcane power cost reduction, and it's one of our main Meteor multipliers. Our other Meteor multiplier comes from Nilfur's Boast, which fits conveniently due to how Talrasha is configured in the boot slot, which is one of the nice things about Talrasha. Fortunately, we have something to use it for in this build. And then we have Nemesis Bracers for the extra elite spawns. It has to be one of the two. It doesn't really matter which bracer you wear. Just use whichever one has better stats for your at the time. Energy Twister damage doesn't matter here. We only really care about the pull, so stats is all that matters. But you're going to want Ranslors as one of your bracers and Nemesis as the other one in the cube, obviously. And then we have a Varus Band in the cube. Again, increasing our golden pickup radius, just making it a very smooth build. As you fly through the rift, you'll be able to scoop up the orbs and be able to pick up items in Death's Breath without having to worry about, do I need to move up a little bit or down a little bit, or, all that's gone. You can just scoop it up and go. It's very consistent. It's the most consistent option. I will list out, there are some alternates if you do want to gear out for pickup radius, but most people, in season, it will be a lot easier just to slot a Varus band. So that's my primary pick for this build. It's probably what I'll be running, to be honest, anyway. And in Synergy, we're using Boon of the Hoarder to drop gold, which gives us extra move speed as well. Don't forget that. So it's extra 30% move speed when we pick up gold. And we also have the gold wrap for defense. So we pick up gold, we have extra pickup radius to pick up the gold, and it gives us extra armor, which keeps us alive. Huge amount of toughness and defense, basically makes you invulnerable. After you pick up gold, you can stand in Molten and pick up your items very easily. It's very convenient. Now, let's move on. Other items in the build, utility items, we also are using homing pads. My pick for the shoulders, just simply because sometimes you have to teleport and you don't want to clear out every little mob. And these shoulders, most of the time, will allow you to do that and still get hit and be able to teleport back to town, which is quite nice. Again, you could use a different shoulder. This is just the most utility I could find for the build. I think that's it for items. Yep. Yep. The cool thing about the Nilfers, before I forget, they increase the damage of Meteor by 600%. Keep in mind that when you have low density or you're going up against the Rift Guardian, typically the secondary will go into effect and you will get increased damage against enemies when they're, separated from the pack, so to speak. You don't want to seek that out, it's just something that passively happens. So there's a really cool thing with this build is the TXIII bonus actually works out really well since we are using meteors, and the TXIII bonus meteors do get buffed by your multipliers. This means that the random attacks of Arcane Cold Fire or Lightning that come down when you're using, when you're teleporting in, when you're using your energy twister, when you are casting Explosive Blast, these random meteors, or even casting meteors, sometimes you will get a double lightning meteor. It's amazing, it's awesome, I love it. So that burst damage is quite nice, especially if it randomly happens when you're engaging elites. Something that is not quite as nice about this build is that it is terrible at killing Goblin packs. I will tell you, man. It is quite difficult once they disperse to actually damage the goblins efficiently. So if you manage to catch them grouped up, take advantage of that window of time before they disperse, and you are chasing goblins all over the place. So one other thing, do remember, since this build does have a lot of gold related items, to equip a pet, a cosmetic pet, in the collections pets section of the Diablo, shop pane. You can equip one of your cosmetic pets and it will pick up gold for you. Before we get into affixes, let's go over where the actual damage is coming from in this build. Where are the multipliers in this build? We have TXIII, which at 4 stacks grants us 3000%, I believe. Multiplier. We have, of course, the Nilfers and the Grand Vizier that I've already mentioned for Meteor, enhancing our Meteor damage. We have Focus and Restraint in this build. And surprisingly, we are not using both of the bonuses, and I'll explain to you why. We're only using a 50% multiplier from Focus and Restraint, only one half of what it could provide. And the reason is simply because of how constrained the skills are. if we were to add a signature to this build, it would reconfigure everything, and we would not be able to maintain resource, number one, because we would have to give up one of these two passive skills to slot a signature, and number two, it's simply more time consuming when you're going through a rift to have to cast two skills just to set up, and you haven't even dealt any damage yet. You have to cast two skills and then a third one to actually deal your damage. If you're doing this over and over and over again, you can imagine it takes a lot longer to complete a rift, especially one that is not quite so dense. So those are the main reasons I have chosen not to put a signature in the build. It's a lot simpler, it's a lot smoother, and you still get a consistent multiplier from this ring set that will carry you through the rift. You may think it's inefficient to gear this way, and it probably is, but it's the highest multiplier you're going to get, and it's the most consistent multiplier that you'll be able to keep up with this build. Let me put it that way, because your other options, I'll go over them later, you know, they're not quite so easy. We have Trapped, Bane of the Trapped, anywhere from 30 to 50% depending on the level of your gem. Multiplier, we have Bane of the Powerful, 20% with the added increased damage versus elites, and it also reduces damage from elites, which is quite nice. Gives you a little extra defense there. We also have Audacity, don't forget that, 30%. I think that's all of the multipliers. The test setup I've been having here is at 2 million, and that's why I found it very smooth to enter into a TXIII. So before this point, it may feel a little bit slower to do TXIII, so this is when I'm going to recommend you actually start going into TXIII is 2 million or thereabouts. I mean, I was able to do 1.75 at almost the same speed, so you know, anywhere from 1.75 to 2 million is where I would, unbuffed is where I would go. Of course, if I apply my magic weapon, the cheat damage is going to go up. But as you can see here, I have no Paragon applied, and that's how I've been running these tests. And in the video, I will also keep it this way when I'm actually running the build in tournaments. So it's about 10,000 intellect or thereabout. Just to give you a guide as to when I would enter TXIII, I was able to solo TXIII very efficiently for a wizard build at any rate, and it's just a very smooth build. It's very comfortable, it's very relaxing, allows you to pick up items without having to worry too much, as long as you keep an eye on picking up gold, since that's your only means of defense here. You're also going to have to use your Teleport Calamity to advantage to be able to stun mobs and keep them at bay while your gold rep bonus is down. So that's the only negative I can see. Moving on to affixes, we have attack speed. You're going to want attack speed on your weapon, both rings, your gloves, and even your chest piece. Try to get it as high as possible. I'm going to recommend above 2 attacks per second. Specifically, I would go 1/100th higher, so 2.01 would be what you're shooting for at least to get within the bracket that I recommend. There is the possibility of hitting, if you have max rolls on all the items that I just mentioned, absolute maximum rolls, and then you go and use the, instead of the Templar, you would use the Enchantress with the 3% attack speed boost. There is a possibility of hitting 1 breakpoint higher, but again, that's only if you have max rolls. It's a lot easier just to go without. And in the video, just to show what it would look like as average, I used the Templar. Resource cost reduction, we're using the Topaz and the Helmet. That's 12.5%. And then we have 8% on the shoulders. It's a required roll. You're going to want resource cost reduction on your weapon as well. And while I found you could manage it without the resource on the weapon at 33% or so arcane power cost reduction in the build, it's a lot smoother when you do have it. So I highly recommend going up to the close to 40%. I think if you have a perfect roll, it's 40% arcane power cost reduction. Maybe wrong on that exact number, but it's close to 40. As far as other affixes go, we're prioritizing, of course, crit hit damage on gloves, rings, both rings. Your amulet, you want to crit hit damage, and crit on your bracers, your helmet, and your source, of course. Going to want lightning elemental damage on your bracers and your amulet. I am missing that on my current amulet. Perfect amulet would be lightning crit. You're going to want meteor percent on your helmet and on your boots. And of course, your Tal source rolls with meteor damage by default. This is actually one of the reasons we are keeping the Taurusha source and wearing it, simply because we would lose this additive damage source of additive damage if we were to swap it out for, say, Orb of Infinite Depth. Plus, it's a free affix. It's an additional affix on the item that you would otherwise be able. So if I swap this out, I would have to give up, say, my Arcane Power and Crit to re-roll this item for Meteor percent if I wanted it to even come close to the same additive bonus. And even then, it still would be only 15% I could get on this item, whereas on the Tal source, you can get up to 25% additive. So it's sort of one of the reasons to, I guess, keep the Taurusha source. Of course, we're going to look defensively for, vitality. I believe Nilfers roll with all resists by default, so that's fine. On your gold wrap, I believe life percent and armor would be best. The one I have didn't roll that way. Let's go homing pads. You could put life percent here instead of cooldown. I just didn't want to re-roll the primal item, but instead of the cooldown here, you could put life percent, or if you wanted more damage, you could actually go area damage. Your manual cast meteors would benefit from area damage. I wouldn't go all out and put it on every item. Just having it on the shoulders, I believe, would be enough for a torment build. But anyways, that's the overview of affixes. I guess I'll list specific, if you want more specific offerings, I'll put those on the build guide. Secondaries, before I forget, are pretty open. If you want some base level of pickup, that's fine, but I would more look for crowd control reduction as something that you would want at least 2 rolls of with this particular build, especially if you're opting for the Averis band, because you can fit them in, and I noticed that I was still getting frozen with this build or nightmared, and it's just very nice to have a little bit of crowd control reduction. Alright, so let's get into some alternate items that you could use for the build. While some of the things I've chosen I found to be the best, there are some alternate picks that can get you to the same place and maybe actually more enjoyable for you. So one of the first swaps that you could make, and I found one of the most enjoyable swaps, was actually using Endless Walk. So instead of using Focus and Restraint, we use Endless Walk, and we wear our Averis band, and we cube the Ring of Royal Grandeur to basically allow us to give up our Tal amulet. And the reason this is actually going to work is it's gives us an extra buffer of 50 damage reduction while we're moving through the rift, which is quite nice, especially if your gold wrap bonus has dropped. Just having that extra DR there can keep you from dying sometimes. And then as you can see the icon now, we're at 50 damage reduction. I'm going to post up, which I mean I'm going to start standing still, and that's when it will ramp up our damage multiplier. You will gain benefit of a little bit of this by the time your first meteor lands. So let's go ahead and show that. So I don't know if you saw, so I'm going to do it again. So I'm casting the twister first. That plus the fact that the meteor takes time to descend, even though it is the lightning rune, it is the quicker of the descending runes, it still takes time to land. The time it takes to do those two actions combined gives Endless Walk a little bit of time to ramp up. By the time your first meteor lands, it will be at least at 15%, probably sometimes it's at 20%, and then every other meteor after that typically has 10% extra multiplier. So your second meteor will be at 30, third meteor maybe at 35 or 40. So it can actually work, and it works really well for killing the Rift Guardian actually. So that's an option, and it was one of the more consistent defensive options that I've tried. Another option is to swap out the Tau Source for Orb of Infinite Depth. So this item would give you 80% damage reduction, so even more damage reduction, a 40% multiplier that has no ramp up time as opposed to Endless Walk, and it's just the upfront damage is very high. And in this configuration I used a Stone of Jordan to give that extra elite damage. It does lower your crit and crit hit damage, but it gives you that extra elemental damage roll, which it's like a side grade, I would say, to an extent, but it does end up being more damage versus elites, which is quite nice. For the amulet, of course, you would use your Tau amulet, and then the problem with this configuration I found is that consistency. Having to hit enemies with your explosive blast on dense rifts wasn't a problem, but on the less dense rifts that were more spread out, this would go down more often, and you might not have defense and the multiplier up, so the performance of the build can vary, but it was, when all the buffs were up, it was one of the strongest contenders, combinations rather, of the three setups. Anyway, that's another combination you can try out. I'm just going to put the rings back real quick. As far as legendary gems go, I highly recommend Pain Enhancer as an alternate gem. This gem gives you extra attack speed when you crit enemies, and since we're going to be using Calamity and then our Twister, there will be opportunity for those two actions to crit on our targets before we start casting Meteor. So it gives us that speed boost before we even start casting Meteor. It's quite nice. I really enjoy it. I've seen attack speed boosts up to, anywhere from 2.4 to 2.6 just with the Pain Enhancer on the right rift, and it just increases your attack speed so much. Unfortunately, in testing, I found Bane of the Powerful to be just the better bonus, considering we already have quite a high attack speed, and there you can still get the Frenzy Pylon and the Speed Pylon, which give 25 and 30% attack speed respectively, so those help out quite a bit as well. But I highly recommend, if you are thinking about, switching up items and dropping either your Boon of the Hoarder, or, you want to run, maybe you want to run, lower Torments, and you just want to drop Bane of the Powerful, I would highly recommend picking up the Pain Enhancer. At least try it out, see how you like it. And there was one other item I quite enjoyed testing with, but because it requires a complete reconfiguration of the items in the build, I didn't recommend it with the main build, and that was Gloves of Worship. I mentioned the Frenzy Shrine. Having that up for 10 minutes is quite a boon, but you would have to reconfigure a lot of items, especially defensively. I believe you have to drop Gold Wrap for that to happen, which would mean you would probably pick up another item. Just remembered to mention Halo of Carini. If you're looking for an alternate to defense, or you just want another item to give you defense, extra padding in your defense, Halo of Carini is the pick. I would drop a Varus Band and pick up the Halo of Carini for that extra padding in defense. You would have to use Storm Armor, Power of the Storm. By the way, even if you're not using Halo of Carini, this was the most reliable source of resource cost reduction. So if you are finding yourself, you don't have the RCR rolls on gear to meet what I've recommended or required to play with the build as listed, definitely try out Power of the Storm. Even if you're not using Carini in the build, it just reduces the cost of the skills so much. It's quite a nice alternate. Another alternate you could go for if you find yourself you think your resource is fine and you don't need Magic Weapon Conduit at all. You can opt for Energy Armor Pinpoint Barrier. This gives extra armor, and so it gives a defensive quality, and it gives critical strike, critical hit chance, which is quite nice, again, for increasing that crit, especially in combination with the Pain Enhancer. The more often you crit, the quicker you get the bleed stacks, and the quicker you can dispense with your your enemies. One other good alternate is actually Magic Weapon Deflection. When you perform attack, you gain a small shield, and as you can see with the Aether Walker, as you teleport, you will gain a shield. That's because it is a resource spending attack. You can also, as you're attacking, you will get shield as well. This will act sort of like a recovery mechanism, give you a little bit extra buffer while you're in combat. It's quite nice. I would actually choose this second in line, assuming I didn't have to fill this slot with a resource mechanism. I would choose Magic Weapon Deflection. One thing to keep in mind is that this build, day one season start, will not probably be able to do T13 right out of the box. You will have to put some effort in gearing to get to my recommended 1.72 million, thereabouts damage to be able to farm T13 efficiently solo. But the good news is it does have the damage, the multipliers, and the scalability to even do 4-player T13, which is great news. And I quite like the build. I love the playstyle. It's very fluid. It's a lot of fun. And I hope you all have enjoyed this video build guide. One of the first build guides I've done in a while, so let me know if you like it. And anyway, I will catch you all on the riffs.